Have y'all had a good time so far? If you're happy, you know it, clap your hands. All right, so it's got to be in unison. Like, it's just clap, clap. If you're happy, you know it, clap your hands. There's a few back there. Let's try one more time. If you're happy, you know it, clap your hands. There it is. See, someone did it on purpose. Y'all can have y'all seats. I first just want to also just reiterate what Paul talked about the Ark and who we are, the Association of Related Churches, and Pastor Greg. And Pastor Greg Surratt and some of the lead team had a desire in their heart to plant life-giving churches in communities that needed them. And for God to use a couple that had a dream in their heart to live beyond themselves. And I absolutely love this vision. I love what God's doing through Ark. I love just really the global impact that Ark has. And there's kind of two ways, and Pastor Daniel's going to speak about it also, kind of get involved with Ark. Obviously, Paul just talked about if you're here and you got a dream in your heart. I like to say this, I like to add this. If you got a dream in your heart and you're submitted to a house, and you're going to be sent, I believe that God can do something amazing through the Ark. And one of the things that I did not plant with Ark, we were a church that existed, and I didn't know Ark, I didn't know systems, I didn't know grow. I just had a vision in my heart to reach our city. And what I love about the Ark is a lot of people says, well, will this work in my context? Will this work in my culture? And I'll say yes, it does. It does, and that's what I love about the system. That's what I love about the structure of Ark. Is it's ambidextrous. It really, you can place it in any culture of church, and it works. Like, why does it work? Because people are people, right? But you need to run the play. Someone asked me while we're here, well, do you have any advice for us? With this thing, I said, run the play. So what do we do next? You run the play. What do we do next? You run the play. You keep doing what you've been doing consistently over time. And I want to kind of share with you a little bit different. I'm not going to preach a sermon to you. I just kind of want to talk to you about if we were successful, which I'm not sure if we are, as a church. The way I look at success is obedience to what God told you to do. And so, if we were to be successful, if we're being obedient, like, what was one of the key things that God put on our heart? What was one of the key things that helped move the vision of our church forward? What was one of the key things in shifting our culture as a church? Now, I told you all a little bit about our story, that I-5 City was not I-5 City. It used to be Living Waters Worship Center, and it was my mom and dad's church. And inside of that church, it was 99.5% African American. Why I say 99.5% is because my wife is biracial. And so when God called us, I was on my way from Nairobi to Nakuru, and we had broke down in the Rift Valley. I was on a missions trip, and when God called us to not leave, to actually stay and change the minds of people at the church, and the specific word that God gave me is I have not called you to birth a baby, I've called you to resurrect the dead. And that's exactly what it's been like, is try to raise and change old systems and try to change old mindsets and try to change tradition. And with that, we've had to establish a culture in our church that wasn't the culture that we were used to. And I'm not talking about a white culture or a black culture. I'm not talking about an older culture or a younger culture. I'm not talking about a denominational culture. But what I've come to understand just about culture is no matter what background you come from, your ethnic culture, your family culture, your past church culture is a subculture to the kingdom culture. And when we start thinking about kingdom culture, one of the things that I believe that is an essential or a foundation of a kingdom culture is to be life-giving. And that might not excite you, but I came from a church that was life-taking. And so when you come from a life-taking kind of house, you serve out of obligation, not dedication. And so one of the things that we tried to do when we started our church is to create a life-giving culture that was based out of not because the pastor said it, not because the pastor needed it, not because you were an armor bearer to the pastor, but because you believed in the vision that God called us all to. And inside of that vision, we needed to have and establish a healthy culture. If I were to give my definition of culture, you've heard Sam Chan, many people give definitions of culture. Mine is this: the culture is the environment in which things grow or die. It's the environment in which things grow or die. And I want to have a life-giving culture as a church, a life-giving culture as a pastor, a life-giving culture in our services, a life-giving culture in our restrooms, a life-giving culture on our campus, a life-giving culture in our meetings, a life-giving culture in our prayer life. And so I wanted to create this culture. And it was hard. And I'll say this, like as I said yesterday, it was hard. It's hard to change people's minds about church. In my context, in America, it's hard to change black folks' minds about church for real. And what I started looking at is just the Word of God, and started looking at what are we doing that is scriptural and what are we doing that is preference. A lot of things that we do are preferences. It has nothing to do. Who said that service had to be 3 hours? Who said that there had to be chairs? I just know of one throne, and that's in heaven. Why do we need chairs on the stage? And so I started making a lot of changes. That was a joke. Like 3 of you got it. I wanted to have life-giving worship. I didn't believe that God moved more just because we cried harder. And so how do we have this life-giving culture? And I want to talk to you from this topic, building a healthy culture through healthy confrontation. Building a healthy culture through healthy confrontation. The hardest people to confront is believers. Christians. Because they start like negotiating with what you're saying versus what God's telling me. Right? God hasn't told me that. Or I need to pray about that. You confront someone, they say, I need to pray. Well, Matthew 18 kind of talks about confrontation. I read the scripture when we're correcting people in our church, when we're having a hard meeting, but I don't think we really understand how do we have Jesus show up in the midst of our confrontation. And it says again, I say to you in Matthew 18, 19, and 20, if 2 of you agree on earth concerning anything, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am in the midst. And I don't fully believe that we operate in the true context of this scripture, because the true context of this scripture is talking about confrontation. And how do we get Jesus to show up and be life-giving in the midst of disagreement, in the midst of confrontation, in the midst of someone acting opposite? And here's what I know: whether you are a pastor, whether you are a team leader, whether you are a husband, whether you are a wife, whether you are a son, whether you are a daughter, you need to learn how to have healthy confrontation. And so we're going to talk about healthy confrontation. I want to just kind of start out with this statement here. Your best or worst days of your church are behind your ability or inability to confront. Your best or your worst days of your church, of your organization, of your marriage, of your family is what? It's behind your ability or inability to confront. And so I understand that Jesus had 12 people, a few of them were crazy, and he had to confront more than he had to, right? Jesus confronted all the time. He corrected behavior all the time. He said, follow me. He said, follow me. He said, watch me. He said, get behind me. He said, you're kind of moving this way, Peter. You're not good. He confronted, and so we need to understand that confrontation is really not about discipline, but rather making disciples. I want to make someone to be a follower of our vision, a follower of Jesus, a follower of the organization, a follower of what God has called us to do. And so I want to give you a couple of just thoughts, and I've got 13, but if I don't get through 13, we'll post this later on the ARC site or something that you could download this or whatever. But number one is this: if we're going to have healthy confrontation, we have to understand that culture is learned, not assumed. Culture is learned, not assumed. Now, if you are a church that is trying to get unsaved, lost people to your church, they are bringing a context of church. They're bringing a context of what they think church is into the four walls of your church. And what happens is as they go through the leadership pipeline, as they go through growth track, no one has told them how to act. How to act is coming from the context of where they're coming from. So I have to understand that culture is learned, not assumed, because here's what we do as lead pastors, here's what we do as team leaders, is we start assuming that everyone should know the behavior, that everyone should know how we dress, that everyone should understand what's inappropriate and not appropriate, and that everyone should understand how to manage, how to have healthy conversation. Everyone doesn't understand that, and so it must be taught and caught. I don't believe it's just caught. I believe it's taught and caught. People says, well, Pastor, at our church, well, we don't get a chance to, how do we know? You got to spend time with me. I love that Sean is traveling with Pastor Daniel, and I love the fact that Sean is going to plant a church in a different area. But here's what's going to happen. Like the soil is Life Point, no matter where the ground, Sean, is standing. The soil is Life Point. So that church has to have the culture of the church that's sending Sean. And how does that happen? He is spending time with Pastor Daniel on the plane, time with Pastor Daniel at dinner, time with Pastor. So he is teaching in a staff meeting, but it's also caught by serving me and serving the vision. And so understand that culture is learned, not assumed. We can't just assume that people know. And I'm telling you, when you are especially transitioning the culture of a church, you are going to think that everyone should know. And I'm telling you right now, if you're a lead pastor, raise your hand. Raise your hand if you're a lead pastor. Guess what? You can't stand it when you keep having to say the same thing over and over and over again. You can't stand it when people don't notice what you notice. You can't. Guess what? That's because you're the overseer. You're the only one that has the perspective of what the vision should be. And guess what? I feel Pastor Chris tells us that don't complain about the very fact that you're needed. It's your job to teach it. Number one, culture is learned, not assumed. Number two, the culture you want is directly reflected by your willingness to confront. I have met so many leaders that complain to the people that aren't or can't change the behavior. Man, I can't stand this is going on in my church. Oh, this worship leader, come on, let's talk about the worship team real quick. This worship leader, she is transitioning way too long. I'm going to preach the message, and she's got the microphone, and she's saying way too much, but you've never had a conversation with her. All you do is change her position. All you do is move her, and it doesn't teach her, and it doesn't teach you. And now because you didn't confront it, she's going to duplicate what you failed to confront. And it's going to frustrate you. And so I have to be willing to have healthy confrontation. I have to be willing to have a conversation. I have to be willing. How do we bring Jesus into this? It has to have a conversation. Why are we scared to have conversations? Why are we scared to meet with people? Eternity is at stake. Lives are at stake. And we just let behaviors just go on. We just let people leave trash in the foyer. We just let the music be average and the transitions not work and the production team, we just let them know. I told our sound guy, it's not your board. You didn't pay for it. So if you're trying to get a win through working the lights, you are winning in the wrong place. If you win at home, you won't have to try to win through serving here. So I have conversations, but we don't want to have conversations. We don't want to have conversations with our spouse. We don't want to have conversations with our employees. If you always do the things you've done, you'll always get the things you've gotten. The culture you want is directly reflected by your willingness to confront. We got to learn how to have healthy confrontation. I had to learn this. I was horrible at this at first. I would just get angry. I would get upset. I'd be on the front row texting everybody. Every service. And I'm getting angry, and I gotta preach the word of God. And I came to find out very quickly that the height of my anger on a Sunday was a direct result of my unwillingness to confront Monday through Saturday. If you're angry on Sunday, it's probably you're horrible at confrontation during the week. But you don't understand this. Sometimes you have no idea that if warfare, spiritual warfare, is simply anything that distracts people from meeting God. Like, I like to break things down to a very simple definition. Anything that distracts from the main goal, right? If that's spiritual warfare and you're distracted all day on Sunday, it's probably because you won't have a conversation during the week. Therefore, you are your own warfare. Number 3. Number 1, culture is learned, not assumed. Number 2, the culture you want is directly reflected by your willingness to confront. Number 3, what gets celebrated and tolerated gets repeated. What gets celebrated and tolerated gets repeated. Man, I love giving gifts. My love language is to give gifts. It is like my friends know I love them, not through me saying I love you. They know I love you through giving gifts, and I love to give gifts. I have given 2 of my friends here very expensive shoes that now they have winded up on sneakers and preachers. It was my fault. Right? And guess what? I'm celebrating people. What are we doing to celebrate the behaviors that that is a part of our culture? What are we doing to acknowledge when people are killing it and knocking out of the park? What gifts are we giving? You know, sometimes if you don't have a budget, this is a bonus. Good job. I do that when I didn't have when my staff was small and we didn't have the budget, and I would say bonus, and everybody would clap. Man, great worship service today. Great, man, WhatsApp and text. Are we texting our team? Are we celebrating our team in the middle? Here's what the problem is, because you don't realize this. You are more apt to notice mistakes than you are to celebrate wins. And if you don't balance that celebrating the win, if you're not sowing that celebrating the win, it's going to be harder for you to confront when there's a thing that you don't want to tolerate. But we tolerate. We tolerate average. We tolerate mundane. We tolerate. Isn't it crazy, pastors, that you are paying people that you tolerate? Right? Every week you're writing a check to say, go ahead and be average. Isn't it crazy? In other words, you are funding your own misery. We're tolerating average. We're tolerating, musicians showing up to practice to learn music. You don't show up to practice to learn music. You show up to practice the music you learned at home. That's average. That's a poverty, a spiritual poverty mentality. Man, eternity is at stake. Man, get a haircut. Wash your clothes. Put on more deodorant. Your breath stinks. That's me. Why? Why do I do that? Because I've earned credit by celebrating when they killed it. And what it does, it lets me to withdraw from the issues when they're not killing it. But if you don't celebrate it enough, it's going to be harder to have the conversation when you don't want to tolerate it. So, man, worship was amazing. Worship was awesome. This is just my language to my staff. Don't do this. When it's not, I'm like, y'all, that sucked. That was awful. And if I get up on the stage and if I lead a song before I preach, it's probably because I did not feel like we worshiped. So why do you allow people to forget words? Why do you allow people to play off notes? Why do we're tolerating it? And now we have a culture, we come to a church that we don't like because we don't like confrontation. Culture is learned, not assumed. Culture you want is directly reflected by your willingness to confront the culture. What gets celebrated and tolerated gets repeated. I love this, number 4. A culture of 10% will make 100% difference. A culture of 10%. Somebody say, what is 10%? Let me help you. Everybody say, what is 10%? Let's try it again. Everyone say, what is 10%? 10% is the 10%, the thing that you would talk about in the car with your spouse, the thing you would go home and be frustrated about when you're trying to rest, the thing that's going to worry you on a Monday when you're supposed to be away and resting. The 10% is the conversation that you're going to have with the person on the phone that doesn't have the ability to change it. And so in our church, we value 10%. 10% is this. Chris, if I had an issue with something you did, hey man, or an idea you had, or not even an issue or a concern, before the conversation is over, we always ask, what's the 10%? Because if the 10% is not communicated, it will turn into 100% gossip. So I say, hey man, so I'll give you a great scenario. I have an amazing teaching pastor. He is amazing, he is amazing, he is amazing. But I didn't like the way he honored. I felt like honor was just a checklist. Let me hurry up and honor so I can preach this message behind a pulpit that he didn't build. So I said, hey man, amazing message. Amazing message. But tell me what you felt about the beginning. Right? Now, if you go to counseling, you will learn something called imago therapy. And so he begins to talk, and as he's talking and I don't understand, I say, so tell me more. What am I doing? I'm becoming all things to all people in order to win the more. The Message version says this, I think it's 1 Corinthians 9, somewhere around there. It says, I entered into their world and tried to experience things from their point of view. So what I did for a second is I took my offense, I took my frustration, and I entered it, and I tried to be in his world, and I said, tell me what you were thinking during that fun. And it was, he wanted to honor me, but he was scared that he wasn't going to meet the time that I gave him, because at my church, other than me, I need to model this. I'm confronting myself. If you go over time, it's an issue. So he was trying to please one part of it, right, and staying within the time, but when he did that, and what we do is we make up, man, he doesn't love me. My staff, they don't honor me. And when I entered into his world, I found out he was just trying to end on time. But I had to enter into it and not be offended, right? And Matthew 18, and get in his world, right? But it starts with a culture of 10%. What if every conversation you had with your spouse, every conversation you had with your boss, every conversation you had with your team, if you said, hey, is there any 10%? Is there anything I can change? Man, I'm telling you, as the lead pastor, I feel like I have the best ideas ever. Right? And guess what I've come to find out? That 10% over time makes 100% difference. What if you initiated the culture of 10% in your marriage, so you think you have peace, but I've come to find out that peace for the sake of peace ain't peace. If being quiet is holding 10%. Is this helping anybody? Number 6. Now watch this now, this is crazy. Celebration must not be an excuse for toleration. Pastor, what are you talking about? You just told me a second ago that I need to celebrate and tolerate. Well, no, here's what happens. I know this to be true. You have someone on your staff, you have someone on your team that is absolutely killing it in 10 areas, and in 2, they're awful. So because they're great at 8, you never address the 2. Come on, let's be real. Do I have anyone? I won't look. Do I have anyone to be honest that says I've done that? Like 3 of you are honest. The rest of you, you're just not honest. Here's what I've come to learn. When you do that, they feel needed. And I've learned that you can't pastor people who think you need them. You can't pastor people who think that they are a gift. Not to the body of Christ, but to you and the church. I'm a gift to this church because I'm amazing at 8 things and I'm horrible at 2 things. And because I'm amazing at 8 things, I can show up late to staff meetings. Because I'm amazing at 8 things, I can be the first one to leave. I can be the last one to arrive because I'm amazing at 8 things. And guess what? What I have come to discover is celebration must not be an excuse for toleration. I promise you, you may be like, oh, I wish he preached. This is way better than what I did yesterday. Because this is actual steps for you to build your church. I'm giving you steps to build your church, and here's what you don't realize. This will alleviate a whole lot of pain. I have come to discover that every situation of someone who left that was hard, if I trace it all back, it started if I just did 10%. If I just 2 years ago, 5 years ago, had one conversation. Okay? If I just said, be careful. You know, we got a situation in our church, and not really a situation, but I noticed when I got back from sabbatical, this one guy, like, going after the church, like the Big C church, and pastors, you know, should spend less time in the office and more time on the street. So we had a men's event 2 weeks ago. I called a meeting after the men's event. I was tired. I said, I want to meet with you. Brought another person in, because you should always bring a second person in with confrontation, because people hear different. So just a quick bonus, right? So we always say at the end of a conversation, I don't have this on my paper, but maybe I should. I always say, so tell me what you heard me say. So that we can agree that when we left here, at least we may not agree on the confrontation, but we agreed on what I said. So I brought him in the office and I said, hey man, I hear you're going at the church. I don't think that's very scriptural, what you're saying. I don't think, that's just a part of me. This conversation is not my issue. It would be my issue to have healthy confrontation. Because my confrontation could sometimes be aggressive. But it's going to happen. No one on my team ever has to worry what I'm thinking. I'm going to say it. So I brought him in, and I said, what's going on, man? Look, check out your Instagram. Matter of fact, pull it up. Go grab your phone. Tell me what you mean by when you say that. And I said, because what I'm trying to say, you're like going after the church, and it sounds like that you're going after our church because you used to be our men's leader, and you now have a following from our church, a platform from our church that your own job couldn't give you, and now you are a leader, whether you think you're the men's leader or not, just because you're still a leader, so people are still following you, so tell me about that. Also, how much time do you spend with lead pastors? Because somehow you are a computer scientist, and I would never come on your job, I said this, to tell you how to do your job, because I don't have a degree. I don't know what C plus Java, any of that is, but somehow, because you can come on my job and tell me how to do my job. And then I gave him this opportunity. I said, this conversation can go 2 ways. It's not that if you agree or disagree, but are you a son or a servant? Because God corrects those he loves. And if you can take this, then you're welcome into the family. I said this, this is exactly what I said. I said, I want you to understand something. I love you, and I'd rather do this with you. But based off this conversation, I'm okay to do it without you. Why are you tolerating your own misery? Number seven, never confront without the goal of bringing new understanding and new life. Never confront without the goal to bring new understanding and new life. My dad told me this. My dad was my pastor for a long time, and he said, you should never, ever confront until before the conversation you know that you're going to bring life. I said, wow. He goes, you should want to make a deposit, not a dump. In other words, if you're upset and you just can't wait to have the conversation so you can get it off of your chest and put it on them, that's dumping. But if you want to grow them, it's a deposit. So you have to ask yourself, is this dumping or a deposit? Is this dumping or a deposit? Because if it's dumping, don't have the conversation yet. Check your spirit. Go before God in prayer. Because this is life-giving confrontation, not life-taking confrontation. This is about dedication, not obligation. Number 8, This is key. What people do for you, or let me say it this way, what people do is not a reflection of who they are. So I make sure that every confrontation I go into, I says, listen, you are an amazing person. God has blessed your life. I absolutely love the reason why you're on our team is your character, but I don't want you to think you're bad because your behavior is bad. Because what you do is not who you are. Right? So I've had to learn this, that when I'm talking to staff, that my words are heavy as the lead pastor. They're heavy. So one of my overseers in a conversation said, Pastor Rick Bazette, you need to learn how to delegate your D. So what do you mean? He says, you're very dominant. You're big. Your passion sometimes comes across as anger. Right? And he says, so I want you to delegate 50% of your confrontation. So I want you to meet with your executive pastor, another staff person, a manager, delegate the conversation and let them have it so that that person who's fragile doesn't see you as a boss, but as a shepherd. And that's based off of people. That's not you all the time. That's based off of their Enneagram. That's why my wife runs this side of our church. I cannot claim to sit up here and talk about personality profiles, Enneagrams, how people receive, that they're a 7 or they're a 4. You know what I'm saying? I'm a 99. Everything is 100%. Like, I don't do nothing halfway. It's like, but what they do is not who they are. Number 9, always celebrate wins, never tolerate losses, frequently communicate opportunities. Opportunities. And what I'm going to do is give you number 10 also with this. There are never obstacles, only opportunities. Never obstacles, only opportunities. So here's what we do. So we have a track and field program at our church. And I'm not going to go into that, but it's for students. There's 250 kids in it. We're pretty good. I feel like this is the only area that I can brag on because it's sports. Like, we're the best in the country with youth track and field. We've sent 6 kids to Division I college, free ride for college, no scholarships. We could potentially have our first kid running the next Olympics that came through our program. We're awesome. Now I'm going to step back into humility. One thing I've learned about the obstacle, what looks like an obstacle, what looks like a roadblock in track and field is just a hurdle. We don't have roadblocks, we have hurdles. We have something that they can get over. I want them to get over it. I feel like, and check this out, when it's time for someone to leave, when it's time for someone, you're frustrated, you've tried, and you know, it's a lot, Abraham's situation, like you just need to go separate ways, they should be better before they leave. Everyone who comes into contact with our church, with me, I want them to leave better no matter how angry I am at them or how they are with me. I want them to be better. And so I don't look at it as a roadblock. I'm telling you guys, I used to be like, they're awful. Babe, go in there and fire them right now. They're never going to get over it. And guess what? All it was doing is I didn't want my own leadership to be stretched. Like, here's what in Ephesians 4, he gave some to be apostles, prophets, pastors, teachers, and evangelists. Apostles, pastors. I don't see preacher. And the Lord rebuked me on this. He said, I didn't call you to be a preacher. I called you to be a pastor. Preaching is not a fivefold ministry. It's not a fivefold gift to the church. It's your personal gift, but it's not a gift to my church. Please don't put your gift before your assignment. We're in the business of people. Guess what? Be careful not to pastor your congregation, but leave your staff unpastored. You don't pastor people really from the platform. If you pastor your staff will pastor people. It'll change the culture of your church. Number 10, I said that there are never obstacles, only opportunities. Number 11, Take note of everything you notice. Everything. I don't care what environment I'm in, I got my Evernote out and I'm taking a note. You know, I could debrief this whole conference. That's who I am. I debrief everything. I want to get better. And I teach my staff to debrief. You know what gives me access into confronting them? I give them access to confront me in the bounds that I've created. So after a service, they can come debrief my sermon. On Tuesday, we have sermon development. And I said, hey, what'd you guys think about the sermon? And what I do is, they normally won't say anything until I give them a bone. So I says, on point 2, I kind of got jacked up. What do y'all think about that? And I invite them in to confronting me, giving me 10%, because when I invite them in to giving me 10%, it invites me to give them 10%. So I take a note of everything. Everything I notice, I take a note. Every single thing. And let me tell you something about confrontation. It's best if it happens in the moment. If you wait on it, you'll stew on it. If you stew on it, it will keep you up at night. If you stew on it, it will enter into your marriage. If you stew on it, it'll enter into your bedroom, married folks. Number 12, it kind of goes with number 11. The debrief always brings relief. Every time I debrief, it brings relief. Man, if I could just debrief it. And number 13, and I'm out of your way, joy is the glue to adjustments. Matter of fact, what I'm saying is it feels so fun. Fun atmosphere. Pastor Daniel came to our staff meeting, we're breakdancing, we're having a great time. And right after that, I'm like, hey, we got to do these 3, 4 things. But guess what? I sowed fun so that I could reap focus. When you sow fun, you'll reap focus. Healthy, life-giving confrontation. God bless you.